Okay, welcome back. I think we will get started here. We're actually going to just do a little bit of an audible. We'll go back to the prior session, secular person versus biblical steward. So if you're in your handouts, we just want to touch on the case study number 2. This is in the first session, secular person versus biblical steward. Case study number 2 is just an interesting situation that quite likely could be relevant for different people here or online. So I'm going to read through this. Case study number 2, talking about Lloyd. Lloyd, see that? Okay. Lloyd is a Christian and a successful entrepreneur. When he was young, his parents taught him to tithe to the Lord's work regularly, and as a result, he still gives 10% of his very substantial income to the Lord's work. Lloyd's wife, is a committed Christian who has been a biblical steward. Lloyd believes his financial success has risen solely because of his hard work and his natural abilities, which he is proud of. From time to time, Lloyd will lie and deceive someone when he feels that it is necessary for business reasons. He justifies this on the basis that he is giving a very significant amount of money to his local church. Because he works long hours, Lloyd feels that he deserves to own many things, such as 2 boats, expensive golf clubs, a large house, a cottage, a condo in Florida, and 2 new cars, which he replaces every 2 years. In order to make up for the limited time that Lloyd spends with his children, he frequently buys them things that they really don't need. However, Lloyd feels that it makes them happy. Although Lloyd already has a substantial income and significant assets, he feels he will be content and happy once his company is established nationwide and generating a 7-figure net income. Okay, we're going to do a couple questions. We're not going to do everything. So first question is, in what ways has Lloyd acted like a secular person? Or possible, provide a scripture reference that would indicate Lloyd is not doing God's will. And there are several above when we look at the comparisons of secular person versus a biblical steward. Any thoughts on what Lloyd is doing here? Lying, yes, thank you. Yeah, he's deceiving. He's deceiving others. It's not in line with God's will. Any other ideas?
The 11th example there is relevant to that. He's not providing the needs of his family, and the time that he needs to spend with them because he's working all the time.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thank you. Yeah, he's really getting wrapped up in his business, it seems like, right? And there just appears to be a lack of balance, and he's devoting an excessive amount of time, it seems, to earning income and growing the business. And I have nothing against growing businesses, but we need to understand things can come at a cost. Any other thoughts?
Example 4 is generally discontent with present levels of income where his business is concerned. He wants to see it increase to a 7-figure income.
Excellent, yeah. We have a contentment issue, it appears. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Yeah, we can. There's a whole section on giving and financial management God's way. God is going to lay on all our hearts what we ought to give. Some people have the capacity to give a lot more than others. That's just the reality of the situation, right? Like one of the things one of the examples we like to show in our seminars. I'm getting slightly off track here, but it's an excellent point that you raised. Thank you. Is certain people, like Rick Warren as an example, I think he gave 90+% of his royalties from Purpose Driven Life gave it away to God's work. Francis Chan, I don't know if anybody is familiar with that author. Crazy Love. He wrote a book called Crazy Love. And I remember watching a YouTube video on, he just like, this thing just exploded, and he got millions from it, and he did not want the consequences of having all this money, these millions, and he just gave it all away to different places in Africa. I don't know specifically where, but he just basically gave all of it away, 100%. Right. So there's obviously extreme situations, and some people have the capacity to do that. But the point being, if you have given the ability to make a substantially above average income, it could be that God wants you to use that for a greater purpose than just continue to grow that and keep that for personal gain, right? So some ideas here. He takes personal credit, how he's not acting according to God's will, acting like a secular person, taking credit. Not giving God the credit. He lies and deceives. Thank you for that comment. Again, we heard personal life out of balance as he works too much and spends too little time with his children. I mean, it's amazing. Children, I believe, care much more about time than money. I've seen that personally. It's my 3 daughters. Lloyd has a problem with pride. Contentment, this is going to keep coming up over and over and over. He's discontent with his level of income, even though it is more than sufficient. Likely has a problem with the love of money, we can speculate a little bit, but that's quite likely. And chasing after treasures on earth, right? Again, we go back to the eternal versus the earthly perspective on possessions. I'm going to move down to because I thought that was a good example. Just because it was brought up with the family life and whatnot. So, what impact will the management of money have on his children, particularly when they become adults and when they need to make their own financial decisions? And also what impact will Lloyd's wife likely have on the children? Any quick thoughts on that?
I think the biggest struggle would be for the children. They would get into the mindset of having everything that they want. And if they then move out of the house, they will not have the income to back up the wants and desires that they're used to having, the lifestyle that they're used to living, going out to eat all the time,
Yep.
or having a new car all the time. They'll Dad always had a new car, so I had to go have a new car. They can't afford it, so they'll finance it. And then they go and finance all of the toys that they were used to having.
Excellent. Yeah. It's the reality. Will quickly set in as the children leave the nest, so to speak. That life is tough, and especially here in Canada, life is very expensive. And if we train our minds to just thinking this is the norm, eating out, having nice things, residence in Florida, expensive trips, different toys. We train our minds, and we're not understanding that life, it requires a lot of hard work. We just get into that mindset that this is how things ought to be, and then eventually accumulate debt to acquire those things we believe we're supposed to have. So we have a reference, Proverbs 22:6, train a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. So some ideas here. Lloyd's children will likely be confused, not sure which example to follow, dad or mom. Unfortunately, there's a risk that one or more children will follow Lloyd's example and make secular decisions with respect to money and material things. Nevertheless, the mother's biblical example should be an encouragement, so that's definitely a positive to their children to manage money God's way. Okay, we will leave that. We just want to move along. We have another case study from session 2, financial deceptions. We did want to touch on, try to get through this. We're not going to do all the questions, but try to get through this somewhat quick, but it is important to understand these. These are, we just want everybody to keep in mind, these are actually real life cases. These aren't people Tony and I have met, but, just bear in mind, Tom has met thousands of people over the years, and he's dealt with many different people with different backgrounds and different financial circumstances and issues. The names are made up, but the situations are real. This isn't just made up out of thin air, right? So this is real life. Somebody here might be going through something similar or know of somebody that's going through something similar, right? So we do believe this is relevant. So Bob, 62 years of age, and Joan, 60, are married and have 2 grown children. Bob and Joan both became Christians when they were teenagers. Over the past 35 years of marriage, Bob has earned an above-average income and Joan worked part-time. Bob and Joan plan to retire in 3 years. To ensure that their finances are in order, they decided to meet for the first time with a financial advisor. Much to their dismay, the advisor informed them, my apologies here, forgot to get the slideshow there. Much to their dismay, the financial advisor informed them that they will both have to continue working and save several $100s per month for another 14 years. Let that sink in a little bit. 14 years before they can afford to retire. Bob and Joan, so they're in their 60s, were surprised and disappointed to learn that that realistically they will not be able to retire for 14 years, so in their mid-70s. Upon reflection, they acknowledged that they had not made it a priority to pay off their credit cards, personal line of credit, or save for future needs, such as retirement or health care costs. In addition, Bob had recently been diagnosed with certain health issues which, although not life-threatening, the doctor recommended that Bob work part-time. However, Bob knew that he must continue working full-time in order to pay off debts and save for retirement. List below, so I think we'll just do probably number 1 here, the financial deceptions. I do have a comment, one sort of personal comment on this, but list below the financial deceptions, i.e. lies that Bob and Joan likely believed and followed. Any thoughts on that? Yep. It wasn't, paying down debt. Excuse me, wasn't a priority. Sorry, go ahead.
Paycheck to paycheck, likely?
Very likely, paycheck to paycheck. Very good. Yeah. So, the comment I'll make, I meant to say this a bit earlier, and Tony was referring to credit cards, right? Like excuse me, I remember this was years ago. We started using our credit cards more and more, but we were trying our best to treat it like a debit card, meaning, we only use it up to whatever's in our bank account so that we can pay it off every month at most. Or sooner. But there was one month there, I can't remember how many years ago it was, I just got busy and bogged down, and it just wasn't a priority, not unintentionally, but I just kind of ignored it. I don't know what was going on in my life. I just ignored it for well more than a month. The next thing I knew, maybe it was 6-8 weeks later, I looked at it online. I don't remember if I got anything in the mail, maybe it was just all online. And I had an $80 interest charge. And I will tell you, never again did I ignore or neglect looking at my credit card balances and attributing the necessary time to standing and paying it off quickly. So, you can go through little things like that, and it can be a great little learning lesson. I always say, okay, we all make mistakes. We can make mistakes doing lots of different things. Just try to avoid making the same mistake twice. And sometimes the mistakes we make can provide excellent learning lessons. So I'm all over my credit card statements now, but it is important. It is important. It's a priority. If you use a credit card and use it frequently, to make sure you understand the need to pay it off as soon as possible. At most every month or even sooner. Okay, so here's some deceptions. Bob and Joan believe the lie that it is okay to live paycheck to paycheck. Like we've said, these are just the deceptions we've seen and we see all around us. They spent all of their regular income and did not save for future needs. Given the credit card debt, they likely believe the financial deception that it makes sense to buy now and pay later. Okay? You can get a lot of things, the furniture, things to make our homes look better. Don't pay anything for a year, things like that, right? We need to be very, very careful and wary of these kinds of things. The price that you're paying ultimately for these things are likely going to reflect the advantage of not having to pay immediately. So just keep that in mind. And given their personal line of credit and credit cards, they probably believed that debt restructuring would solve their financial problems. Yeah, debt restructuring is a big thing, and unfortunately people use that and don't pay attention to really what's at the heart of the issue of their debt accumulation. Okay. So I think we will leave it there, for purposes of time. I think we will carry.
For a question?
Yeah, sure.
So we can see where they messed up.
Yep.
But how would they proceed?
Okay.
What would be a practical way? Because working for another 15 years, if the doctor says you should be part-time now,
Yeah.
it's not really practical.
Yeah. No, it's a tough question. Practically, how can you work for another 10, 15 years into your 70s? There's going to be certain situations where, we don't, not necessarily privy to all their individual finances, but, you have to look at, I think, what are your biggest, most significant expenditures? And the cars, automobiles, and houses, properties are just, they can be killers, right? And, unfortunately, sometimes we have to make hard decisions. If I cannot realistically work into my 70s because of health issues, and it's not going to be likely I'm going to be able to do that, then I have to probably, I'd say, long story short here, probably come to terms with I may need to downsize. It's a very tough, may not be pleasant, most people don't want to do it, but that would probably be the last thing. But if cutting out the smaller things, like the eating out, the more expensive clothes, the smartphones, and then we build up, if going down to one vehicle and really cutting the meat off the bone and going down the bone, if that's not going to really put a dent in our debt, then I think the last thing would be the downsizing. But it's a tough question, right? Because if realistically health will not enable you to work that late in life, unfortunately, I think you're going to have to ask yourself some tough questions. But you might have to deal with it. So that's probably practically sort of my thinking right now. There's no quick fix to this, unfortunately. If you've neglected it for years and decades, you're not going to get out of it in a year. That's just sort of kind of how it works. So it's a good question, though. Thank you.
I have a small comment, not that I'm saying you're not doing it properly. Just sometimes I feel that maybe we can just go in depth a little bit more, like 0% financing, 0% payments for a year, or like 0 down, all that stuff. We don't have the money today. We won't have the money a year from today. And the way these things work is
Yeah, so so on the furniture, if that's what your first point, so you're saying that of all the people that do the buy now, pay later, don't pay a cent event, 8% pay it back on time. It's very interesting. I had no idea it was that low, but I'd agree. I'd agree. They very likely realize and understand most people will not be able to pay it in full. But that's a very interesting point. I'm not sure if Tony, if you knew anything like that, but so I appreciate you sharing that. I don't have any other details around that, but that's just, I think that just goes to show we really, really need to avoid, unless we're 100% confident virtually that we can pay. Let's say you get a dining room set. Those things are very, very expensive. And I've looked at, I'm going to be honest, I look at my dining room for years and I'm like, oh, we got to change all the chairs and at minimum, right? But that's $1,500 maybe, something like that. It's right. Like, I don't, and there's that temptation. Yes, let's just get it from Leon's or something like that and do that. But that's, yeah, I'd encourage you, thank you for sharing that stat, to be very wary of these things. It could be baked into the price, or if you're not sure you can pay it back on time, you're going to really get dinged with high interest charges. I don't know exactly what they are. Now on the car, 100% agree. Do we need a $100,000 pickup truck? I mean, that's something, like I just go back and just, I encourage everybody to ask ourselves. The other thing I'd mention, slightly different, is we bought a van. We had 3 small girls, and then we bought a van. This was back in mid-2000s. And I was a bit naive and thinking, oh, they say, okay, it's zero interest. It's zero interest. And I thought, okay, well, that's a pretty good deal, right? So, but little did I know that they bake that into the price. Like, you got to be, very cognizant of these sort of things, right? But back then, I wasn't really aware, wasn't in tune with what I was doing, wasn't astute. Not that I still have things to learn, but I thought, okay, let's do it. So we went on a payment system, right? And it ended up taking me 4 or 5 years thereabouts to pay it back, and probably much more than I should have, right? Because they just jack up the price. So again, you learn these things, and now I try to, we paid cash for all the rest of our vehicles since then, right? Little things. I appreciate you bringing up that point. I don't want to get too off track with the time, but that's with things and deals that look interesting. Yeah, take the time to dive in and really look at what are the consequences if you don't pay it on time, or how much you're actually paying above a comparable item, I guess.
If it looks too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just to add to that, can you hear me? I think that's a really good point, what you mentioned about the pickup truck, because it's also indicative of what people do when we purchase property, right? We purchase homes, and we use the justification, hey, it's a need, right? Because you know how we talk about needs and wants. But to your point, right? Like, I mean, yeah, you need a pickup truck for if you're self-employed, you got a business, I need a pickup truck, but do I need a $100,000 pickup truck, right? If I really can't afford it. Like I said, you extend that out into homes, and unfortunately, many people over the past 10 years have purchased homes that they really cannot afford. And I'm just leaning on my experience at that. I used to work in a bank, so you'd see people come in and they would want, essentially, they just want to know what's the max they can borrow, right? They want to know what's the biggest house I can buy. And I always tell people, look, if you're going into a bank or any lending institution and asking them what you can and cannot afford, you got a real problem. You have to know what you can and cannot afford, because it's not just about buying the house, right? Like, you might have, to your point, you might have a pickup truck, you might have other expenses, you might have health expenses. Everybody has a different, you might be saving for your retirement, you might have kids. So don't rely on banks, and I'm not knocking banks, right? They're in business and they have a purpose, right, in our culture. But don't rely on them to tell you what you can and cannot afford, right? You got to know what your financial situation is, and we're going to talk about that now in more depth. So thanks, Eli. Okay. But great questions. See, that's good. I'm sure most of us are thinking the same thing, right? And just back to the housing thing, and I just want to harp on that again because it's really important because it's such a significant investment. And when people, make the mistake, it is a mistake to buy something that they really cannot afford, and they really stretch themselves so much. When you look at what's happening now, right, with these rising interest rates, unfortunately, there's probably going to be a lot of people that are going to lose their homes. Okay, because you got people going from interest rates of 1.5% to 2%, going up to 5% to 6%. And if you're like most people living paycheck to paycheck, just struggling to make ends meet, either when those mortgages come due, you're probably going to have to sell the home because you won't qualify for the mortgage anymore at the higher interest rate. And a lot of people are on variable mortgages, so what happens is it fluctuates with the increase in the prime rates, which is what's been happening. So a lot of people right now are going to be forced to sell their homes probably because they just can't afford. Their payments have increased from, like I said, some of them 20, 30, 40%. And if you have a buffer, yeah, you can absorb that, but most people don't have a buffer, right? We don't have savings, and that's the issue. So just something to keep in mind. Again, bottom line, let's buy what we can afford, right? And we want to have a game plan to determine what we can and cannot afford, and we'll talk about that when we get to the budgeting session. But before we do, let's quickly look at some steps to get out of debt. And again, just keep in mind this applies to, again, individuals. It can apply to businesses across the board. They're just basic steps that we can apply to help us reduce debt and eventually get out of debt, which is what I think our long-term goal should be. So the objective, a practical understanding of how to reduce your debts with the long-term objective of becoming totally debt-free. I think we can all agree that's something we can aim at, right? Key biblical principle: since God warns of the dangers of debts and clearly discourages debt, it's God's best for all Christians to have a plan to become debt-free. So step number one, again, we want to go to the Lord, right? We want to get spiritual discernment because, again, everybody's situation is different. The key here is, look, we got to humble ourselves and just accept the fact that we can't figure it all out on our own, and we need the Lord's guidance in this because, to Eli's point, there's many people that have accumulated debt for many, many years, right? 10, 20, 30 years. And now they're trying to figure out how to get out of it. And to his point, it doesn't happen overnight now. If you've spent 20, 30 years accumulating debt, it's going to be very difficult to get rid of that debt in just 1 or 2 years. It's just unrealistic. But if we go to the Lord, I mean, He will show us the way. I mean, we just got to try and follow and implement some of these principles. Okay, so number 2, regularly study and meditate on God's Word. And that's what we're doing here, right? Let's just get into God's Word and try to understand exactly what we need to do practically to kind of move forward. Just a suggestion, what I find helpful, and this is generally speaking, just today, if you can, you've got the printouts there, and there's a lot of scriptures. If there's something that really speaks to you that jumps out, just save it on your phone or commit it to memory, because whenever you come across these kind of different temptations and financial issues, it's good to be able to lean on that. So for example, like a couple that I really like that resonate with me is Proverbs 21:20, right? The wise man saves for the future, but the foolish spends whatever he gets. I mean, it's simple, right? Wise man saves for the future, but the foolish spends whatever he gets. It's easier said than done, right? Like not many people do that anymore today. Nobody really wants to save for the future because we have credit readily available to us. So if we can buy it now on credit, we usually do that, right? The second one is Proverbs 22:7, which says, the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is a slave to the lender. And the reason this kind of really struck a chord with me is because I used to work in the banking industry, in small business banking. And I saw this play out. I mean, it's sad. Like, who wants to be a slave to a lender? I mean, and again, I'm not knocking the banks. I'm not knocking the lending institutions. That's their business. They lend money and with interest, and that's the nature of their business. But we just have to be wise in how we borrow. Again, as a general rule of thumb, I think something we should all really aim at if we can get to a point where we only have to borrow to purchase a home, have a mortgage, I think that's ideal. I mean, if we can one day become debt-free, that's amazing. But as we all know, it takes years to pay off a mortgage, and especially with the real estate prices here in Ontario, it's tough. Like I feel for first-time home buyers. I thought it was tough for my wife and I when we bought 25 years ago, but now it's just gone insane, right? Because people's incomes have not kept pace with real estate prices. So, I mean, if you really think about what we've been talking about here today, if young adults don't apply these principles, and this stuff's not being taught in schools, right? If they don't apply these principles, a lot of young adults will never be able to own a house. It's almost impossible. You come out of university with school debts. By the time you pay those off, and then you try to save to purchase a home when the values just keep going higher and higher, and people aren't in the mindset of saving, especially young adults. You know, a lot of these credit card companies give credit cards to students that don't even have jobs just to get them going on, spending on credit cards. So I don't want to hammer this point, but it's just so important for us to just get into God's Word and understand these principles. So we've covered that. Some examples of Christians violating, principles. We've touched on a lot of these, having no savings for unexpected expenditures. And a lot of the stuff we don't think about it anymore, right? Like if your fridge breaks down, you just go buy another one, put it on your credit card. Nobody really thinks about saving if your car breaks down or if your furnace breaks down nowadays. You just put it on a credit card. But the problem is we put everything on our credit cards and then we don't end up paying them off at the end of the month, right? Taking on too much debt. That's Proverbs 22:7, which I just touched on. Buying things they really do not need because of covetousness or a lack of contentment. One thing I'm just going to point out quickly, we have to keep in mind that there's a spiritual battle going on here, right? Like the enemy's always trying to tempt us, to spend money on things that we really don't need that's going to hurt us in the long term. Make no mistake. I mean, it's all around us. I mean, I just purchased a car a year ago, okay? But prior to that, the car that I had prior to that was like 17 years old, And I was fortunate. I have a friend who works for Honda, and he's always taking care of it for me. But people would laugh at me. They go, "Why are you driving around with that old car, right?" Well, you know what? Like, yeah, it was old, but the bottom line is it did what I needed to do. But when I used to go to the dealership for an oil change on my other vehicle, I'd see these other new vehicles and 0% financing and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, I'd like, you know what? I work hard. I should just get myself a new vehicle, like 30 grand. What's the big deal? I can afford it. And that would happen every time, you go in there and you start looking at all this stuff, but then I walk out of there and it's like, God would convict me. He goes, you just don't need it. Like, what do you need it for? You have already one pretty good, reliable vehicle, so this one's old. And, I made it go to like 250K and then finally got a new one. So anyway, just, you got to just go to the Lord and follow the Lord's peace or lack of peace with respect to certain things, right? Don't just make knee-jerk decisions, because that's generally the enemy tempting us to do stuff that's, again, just going to harm us in the long run. So I'll just move this along quickly. Just another point here, co-signing a loan. Just want to touch on this. It's a dangerous thing to guarantee payment, of someone else's debts, and it's kind of discouraged. It's discouraged in God's word. So just wanted to point that out. I know we can't really go in depth about it. Number 6, getting involved in an investment that they did not understand. We talked about that earlier as well. This is the big one, not having a budget. And we're going to just go in depth in the next section about this. A budget essentially is going to, it's going to give us the tools, the financial tool to be able to make wise decisions, because it's going to tell us where our money's going, and it's going to tell us what we can and cannot afford. A lot of people, unfortunately, just have no idea what they can and cannot afford, right? They just go and spend, and then if they have money at the end of the month, they pay what they can, and the rest just kind of, rolls over, on their credit cards. So having a budget, or whatever you want to call it, a financial plan, a cash flow plan, is just Very, very important, right? It's key to making sure that we're able to pay down debt and then use, if we do have a surplus, we can use that to invest, okay? So number 3, okay, we want to evaluate present financial position. This is similar to what I've been talking about. I'll just elaborate a little bit here. When we look at our assets and liabilities, generally speaking, what you're looking at is things that you own versus things that you owe. So let's take the example of a house. You own a home. You have the value of your house. That's your asset, which is like $1 million. But most people have a mortgage attached, right, to that property. So say the mortgage is $800,000. That's your liability, your obligation. So the net, the $200,000, is really your net worth, and that's what you want to focus on, right? With all of your assets and liabilities type thing. Net worth is a reflection of your financial strength, your financial stability. We want to grow our net worth. Some people, unfortunately, have a negative net worth, and they're not even aware of it, right? Because they're constantly accumulating debt. So assets and liabilities are important. You want to know what your financial position is. At the same time, you also want to look at your revenue and expenses. Revenue expenses kind of are a reflection of your kind of like, think of it from a business point of view, it's like your operations, right? It's like your monthly cash flow. And we're going to get into that now on budgeting, which is your cash flow plan. Essentially, what you want to do is you want to track your monthly expenses, right? And, just what you can do, even go back a few months so you get like an average type thing. You don't want to just look at 1 month in isolation. So you get an average of what your monthly expenses are, and then you know what your after-tax income is, and then you can determine whether or not you've got a surplus or a deficit. Ideally, you want to have a surplus, right? So then you can use that surplus to pay down debts. If you can pay, hopefully you pay off those credit cards first. But if those are paid off, then you can use it to pay off more towards your mortgage or other debts. If you don't have any debts, which is great, then you can invest that money, right? Spend some of it on yourself to enjoy life too. I'm not saying don't enjoy life. We don't want to be like kind of legalistic here, but most people don't have a surplus of cash at the end of the month, and that's got to be the goal. So then you have the option to pay down debt or to invest that money. Okay. So number 5, ask God to enable you to be content with His provision. I think we've hammered that point home. Ask God. Godliness and contentment is a great gain. We brought nothing into this world. We can take nothing out of it. In Hebrews 13:5, keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have. Number 6, okay, with your surplus of cash, pay off the most expensive debt and non-deductible debt first. Okay, so what's the most expensive debt? Right. That's the first thing you're going to do. If you have a surplus, you're going to generate a surplus of cash. The first thing you do is pay off those credit cards. 100%, like the whole thing, not the minimum payment. Then what you want to do is, when we refer to non-deductible debt, okay, so let's take you have a home. The mortgage on your home in Canada is not deductible, right, for tax purposes, right? However, if you own a second home, right, as an investment property where you generate rental income and you have a mortgage on that home, you can deduct the interest expense on that home for tax purposes. So what it does is kind of offsets the interest rate that you're paying. So the net interest rate is probably a bit lower. So what you want to do with surplus of cash is you want to pay off the non-deductible debt first, which would be your primary residence, right? That home, or any other debts that you can't deduct. So like if you're self-employed, you can deduct certain expenses, right, from your business. So you get a bit of a tax break. You don't pay as much in interest. But what we want to do, like I said, first and foremost, pay off the most expensive debts and then the non-deductible debts first. Those are the priorities. So the question, what is the higher priority? Pay down debt or save for future needs? What do you guys think? Okay. Yeah, generally speaking, Eli brought up a good point. We were talking about this, right? And you kind of mentioned, maybe an argument can be made, say before we had all these latest interest rate hikes, we were in a very low interest rate environment, whatever, I don't know, 7, 8 months ago before we had the hikes. Somebody could argue, say, well, I'm only paying like 1.5% or 2% on my mortgage, right? Maybe I should put some money towards my retirement. And there's nothing wrong with that, if you think about it, because you might be able to generate maybe a better return than 2% on your retirement portfolio, or you might have children and you want to save for their education, so you want to put it into an RSP, and there's some benefits. The government, provides some benefits there. So it's not black and white, right? But I think what I would say now, given the interest rate hikes, people are paying more now on their mortgages, and again, obviously, if you have credit cards, that would be a priority, but it does come down to everybody's individual situation. Like I said, it's not black and white. I think we do want to think ahead too. Like, we want to save for our retirement. We want to save for our children. There's some people that have, medical needs. I don't know, you might have to save for. But yes, generally speaking, I think you should first look to paying down your debts, right? Because there's always a cost to the debt. If you only have a mortgage, then maybe you might be able to divert, like I said, some of that to investments, future needs, because the rates are fairly low. But if you have what I refer to as unsecured debt, so a mortgage is secured debt because it's secured against your house. Remember I talked about earlier, if you don't make your mortgage payment, the bank could either force you to sell the house or take the house from you, depending on how much equity you have in there. So that's secured, that's secured debt. Unsecured debt are things like credit cards, right? And just general loans type thing, where the interest rate is generally higher. So you want to get those things paid off first. You don't want to be, look, again, I'm not knocking banks again, but I think they make enough money. We don't need to give them any more, right? Banks or credit cards. Like, it's better we keep it for ourselves and invest it in our families, invest it in our futures. Okay, and number 7, independence upon God. Let's follow up and persevere until you're debt-free. Yeah, this is important. This is not going to happen overnight. Like, we just got, it's a daily struggle. Like, we just got to try and apply a lot of these principles every day, and gradually we'll start to see the benefits. Don't get discouraged, right? We talk a lot about this in budgeting. I get it. Budgeting is not it's not the most exciting thing to want to do is budgeting, but you know what? It has really long-term benefits. Like, you really will reap the benefits in the long run if we start to do that, and we're gonna, I think, move into that shortly. But I think Eli, you're just gonna maybe sum up here. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Tony. So, yeah, it is an interesting question. Do we want to prioritize paying down debt versus saving for the future? And we really need to be mindful, just to kind of add my comments on that. If we, again, going back, if we could have perfect foresight and vision, and if we could see a world where interest rates stayed at 2% or below indefinitely, forever, for the rest of our lives, it might make a lot of sense to assume a little bit of risk and invest some to save for future needs. But the reality is, I go back to this again, we just don't know. And so for me personally, my plan is, I've got a fixed rate mortgage. It's below 2%. It will come due in 3 years. So I am sort of laser focused on really getting that down or as close to zero as possible by that time. The issue is that, some people will say, and especially potentially at the banks or wherever you're getting your financial advice from, your worldly financial advice as well, interest rates are increasing, but eventually inflation will come down, and interest rates will come down, and in the next few years, interest rates will start declining, and they might be fairly low again, so you don't have to worry too much, right? This is some advice, you might have heard or will start hearing if you are in those discussions about what do I do about my mortgage? How much of a priority do I make it? But you need to understand that, we really don't know what's going on in the world. And interest rates could, right now they're at, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this later, they're at 5-6% on new fixed rate or even variable rate mortgages, right? But you don't know. I mean, maybe they come down to 4%, but that's still going to be a hardship for a lot of people that are used to living in this 2% world, right? So it is tough. It is a tough decision to make because you got to pay back your debt. Let's say it's 4%, 5%. Can you guarantee you make that over the next several years with your investments? Only God knows, right? So you really need to factor that into your decision making and pray about it. It's only God knows the future, right? So my suggestion is, with the uncertain interest rate environment and it's going higher, make that more of a priority, and that's what I'm trying to do personally. And I would say, just a comment on this. When we think about debt reduction, and different people might be in different stages, and I don't know, how much of this is a priority to you. I mean, I can tell you how much of a priority it is to me, but what I can say is it's important to understand that when we think about steps to get out of debt, you can't just mesh this in with the rest of your life. If you have the mindset that, well, if everything's going to be important and everything's a priority, then the reality is nothing's important. If this is a priority, it needs to be highly important on your list of to-dos. And you might not realize this, but we are sort of teaching this as like a training exercise. So if this becomes a priority, it's like, think of it like losing weight. If losing weight is a priority, you need to do it systematically, methodically. You need to be disciplined about it and dedicated to it. If your goal is, I'm going to lose weight, well, I'll kind of wake up tomorrow and, do some cardiovascular activity, and then, next time I feel like doing it, maybe next week I'll do something else. It doesn't work like that. The same thing with getting out of debt, right? You don't just kind of do it when you feel like it or when it suits you, right? It's really dedicated, focused on these steps that we've outlined. Pray and ask God. Have a relationship and ask Him for His direction and wisdom. Regularly study and meditate on God's Word. Okay, so we really want to understand what God says about this. So then we move into the practical. Okay, so we're going to get into the budgeting, but we need to evaluate our financial position, assets, liabilities. What does our household net worth look at a point in time right now? And then what's coming in, what's going out? What's our income, our revenues, and expenses? And then use that framework to develop and implement a budget. And then again, we go back to this idea of contentment. We need God's help to be content with His provision. And then once we do that, that leads to the next step. We will be able to develop a surplus to pay off the most expensive debt first, the non-deductible debt first. You don't want to have credit card debt that's sitting there with 24-25% interest. Okay, so then perseverance, that's something, I want to emphasize that, when we talk about budgeting especially, but perseverance, dedication, discipline, training. This is financial training. So this is our plug to do that, right? Same as if your goal is to lose weight or learn how to play an instrument. If you just do it when you feel like it, randomly, it's not going to happen. So the memory verse, recommended memory verse. If you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all His commands, I give you today, the Lord will open the heavens, the storehouse of His bounty, to send rain on your land in season and to bless all the work of your hands. You will lend to many nations, but will borrow from none. Deuteronomy 28, 1 and 12. So God clearly discourages debt, and that really hasn't changed. So we've got a case study, get into the more practical. Try to get through. This one's going to involve a few numbers, just to see what's going on before and after budget of Jim and Jennifer. So they're both married. They both earn average incomes. By the end of their first year of marriage, they noticed that their credit card balances had increased. They thought this was no problem due to some one-time expenses that they incurred as newlyweds. However, over the next 2 years, the balances on their credit cards and personal line of credit increased substantially. They did not understand why this was occurring. As a result, they decided to attend a small group biblical financial study at their church. They were amazed how much God's word had to say on finances. Jim and Jennifer realized that they had inadvertently been violating a number of biblical principles. Over the next several months, they made it a priority to learn what God has to say on finances in His Word. Next, they recorded all their expenses for 2 months, which revealed that they were spending more than they were earning. This explained why their debts had been increasing. Jim and Jennifer developed and implemented a budget to ensure that they were spending less than they were earning. They purposely used the surplus to pay down debt. So they focused on paying off their credit cards as the interest rates were very high. They destroyed 2 credit cards and kept just 1 each. They agreed not to use the credit card unless it was absolutely necessary. Next, they paid down their personal line of credit. In the process, it was necessary to reduce their expenditures. Although this was difficult, they prayed and trusted God to enable them to persevere with their reduced lifestyle and the reduction of their debts. So, within 3 years, Jim and Jennifer had paid off all their credit cards and their personal line of credit. They both felt like 100 pounds was lifted off their back. They didn't realize the burden of their debt load. Today, they've developed a new budget where the surplus is being applied against their mortgage. They learned that by paying just $400 per month extra against their mortgage, they will save about $50,000 in interest and be totally debt-free within 9 years. Jim and Jennifer regularly thank the Lord for the financial wisdom in His Word and how God has enabled them to be content with a reduced lifestyle. Okay, I'm just going to, I think I'm going to drop down a bit here. Just a second. Yeah, we're gonna get to the, because a lot of this is, we've kind of touched on already, the actions that were not consistent and that were consistent, just because we're running a little behind on time. So what I want to get to is the actual budget. That's okay, Tony, you think? Just to get to the actual budget. Yeah, so just do that. You have the information in your handouts, the actions they were doing before and after. So we want to review the schedule because this is interesting. Okay, so we got the before and after schedule. Hopefully you got that clearly in your handouts. You might have to flip a few pages there. So we're going to review the before and after schedule of expenses for Jim and Jennifer in the slides that follow. Okay. Okay, it might be a bit small there, but you got the handout. So what we have here, situation, we got donations, $250. Okay, housing, I won't go through all that. Relatively non-discretionary, just a little over $2,000. Okay? We got food at $700. Automobile expenses coming at about $800 a month. Paying $400 minimum on their credit cards, $100 on personal line of credit. Okay, so $500 on that, on the debt service. Moving right along, entertainment, recreation, eating out. We've got $250 vacation, $150 sport and gym. So we're moving from the non-discretionary into the discretionary components. Clothing, I mean, we need clothes to wear, obviously, but the question is, what do we need to spend on that? So that's 350 in healthcare. Okay, we got insurance, miscellaneous, some other sections. So we got our $700 deficit. Okay, so that's the before schedule. Just going through this a little bit quick. Okay, so the question is, in order to eliminate their deficit and obtain a monthly surplus, what do you think they should do? Just a few ideas. Very good. Very good. Yeah. Yeah. This is a facetious comment. In case anybody hasn't noticed, inflation is really, I would say inflation had really crept into what retail fast food outlets and chain stores have charged. I'd say that started during the pandemic, somewhere in there. Like, it's just, I understand why to a point, but some of these price increases I've seen at restaurants and whatnot, it really seem to get a bit excessive. Even people where I work that have some of them relatively high incomes were commenting on that last year, I remember. So something to think about when, dining out, eating out, the fast food. Anything else? Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. No, the gyms, they need to charge a lot. No offense to anybody that's working there or a manager there or anything owns one, but you need to charge a lot. You got to make it look nice, and you got a lot of operational costs, and it requires a significant monthly membership fees. That's just the way it works. So, yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. I'm not totally sure what that is. So me personally, I just find it. I was going to mention this a bit later, but I find it very helpful to identify as much as possible because it can create a little bit of confusion when you just kind of lump something into miscellaneous and others. So that's just me. So I don't know exactly. Pardon me? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like I find it helpful just to identify as much as possible so I understand where everything's going.
There's potential you could possibly take down some gas and oil and insurance depending on if they have two vehicles.
Yeah.
If they only need one, if one of them can get a ride to work and cut that down. Or, if they're cruising around every weekend going on a 2-hour road trip, that might potentially be something that we have.
Absolutely. Yeah. No. The more we use our vehicles, the more we are going to pay for it, and it adds up. Wear and tear on the tires, gas, the oil changes, all the things that will start breaking down. Yep. So, got a few ideas here as well. Jim did more of the house maintenance and auto repairs himself. They decided not to travel anywhere for a vacation for 3 years, but only did inexpensive day trips. So that would be utilizing your vehicles more, but that could greatly offset significant vacation expenditures as they were incurring. Jim and Jennifer canceled gym memberships. That was a great comment there. And reduced clothing expense as well. We might like to buy nice clothes and have nice new clothes frequently, but again, let's ask ourselves why, and do we need to do that often, right? And I get it might be more important for some of us than others. I understand, but these things can really add up sometimes. They sold one of their 2 automobiles. This is sometimes the reality, right? It's not always easy and convenient, but that might be totally necessary. They substantially reduce their entertainment and recreation. Again, we're getting into discretionary things, and if we can cut a lot of discretionary expense, that could greatly help us reduce our debt. Purchase groceries from a discount store. Yeah, I mean, there's some places that charge a lot of money. Sometimes I ask myself why. I've been into a couple of grocery stores, and it's almost same identical product, like 30, 40, 50% higher in price, and I'm not really sure why. They both became much more careful as to what they purchased in general. So just making this a priority, right? That's the key, right? Just being disciplined, being careful day to day, week to week. So this is the after. So you've got that. The after, donations 500. We haven't really changed housing that much. Like I said, we go after the more discretionary expenses first to get to that surplus. We want to go after discretionary expenses, and we want to cut down high interest debt. Those are the things we attack first. Okay? Food, so we cut that down a couple $100, down to 500. Auto, going to one vehicle. That's not going to cut your expenses in half, because you have to understand you're going to use that one vehicle more, right? But it will cut down the expenses somewhat. Okay? Eating out, that took a huge haircut as well as vacation. So it's just learning to be content with a reduced lifestyle, right? And that could very well involve cutting out a lot of more discretionary items. Clothing went from $350 to $100. You see that there. Okay, so we went from I guess it was $750 deficit to, I can't remember the exact number, but now at a $500 surplus. So that is the situation with Jim and Jennifer, and I think, just to wrap that one up, originally had a deficit of $700 per month, and after they implemented God's financial principles, they had a surplus of $500. So they turned that around. They did several actions to create a $1,200 benefit. They reduced their expenditures by $1,450 per month, increased their giving by $250 per month to bring it up to 10%. So that sort of nets out to $1,200. Developing and maintaining a monthly surplus is essential. Okay, so as we said, to pay down debt and save for future needs. So I think we are going to, we are done session 3.